Germany, 1970. Robert James Fischer is playing an exhibition game against a 19-year-old Swedish talent who would later become one of the most solid, rock-steady grandmasters in the world, Ulf Andersson. With the white pieces, Fischer sidesteps the well-trodden paths of theory, setting aside his trademark 1e4 and opting instead for 1b3, the Nimzo-Larsen opening. Surprising as that already is, it isn't the real twist of this game. We will come to that shortly. For the moment, Black replies 1e5. The bishop goes to b2, putting pressure on the central pawn. Black defends with knight c6, and before Black can seize the center with d5, White advances the c-pawn to c4. Play continues with knight f6, e3, bishop e7, after which Fischer plays a3. The point is that once Black castles, the queen can develop to c2 without being harassed by a knight, a typical idea from the Sicilian, but with colors reversed. Black brings a rook to e8, and to discourage a comfortable e4 thrust, White plays d3. At first glance, this may look passive, hardly Fischer's style. But in chess, as in war, the most important operations must remain classified. The shape of White's opening plan will become clear later. Black withdraws the bishop to f8, and development continues with knight f3. Now, to curb any queenside expansion with b4, Black plays a5. After this, White develops the bishop to e2, and Black strikes in the center with d5. The pawns are exchanged and the knight recaptures. We have reached a characteristic pawn structure known as the hedgehog. It is usually employed by Black, but here, Fischer is using it with the colors reversed. Why is it called the hedgehog? Because, like the animal, it looks passive at first glance, yet is bristling with spines ready to prick the opponent the moment they venture too close. Continuing, White's queenside knight develops to d2. To avoid overloading the two pieces defending the e5 pawn, Black plays f6. Let us pause here for a moment. It is worth emphasizing that this move will have to be played sooner or later to relieve the pressure White is exerting on the e5 point. However, every pawn advance either weakens an adjacent square or creates a new pawn break. For instance, a5 left b5 weak, and f6 creates the g5 pawn break, an avenue to open the g-file in White's favor and to activate the long diagonal. For the moment, this may seem insignificant, but in just a few moves we will understand it at Bobby Fischer level. For now, play continued with White castling and Black developing the bishop to e6, bringing us to the most critical moment of the game, and we will break it down step by step. At this point, White's blueprint was to bring a rook to c1, then the other to e1 or d1, even retreat the queen to b1, and wait, and I do mean wait, for Black to reveal their intentions. This decision is extremely solid, as it is very hard for Black to crack this pawn structure. Yet you do not become a world championship contender by bunkering with White and simply waiting to see what the opponent does. That was not Fischer's plan. The evaluation of the structure changed when, instead of following the usual defensive schemes, Fischer played King h1. Double exclamation for its historical impact. We will return to this shortly. For the moment, the point of putting the king on h1 is that, after Black answers with queen d7 on the next move, White can bring the rook to g1 and begin a kingside assault along the g-file, aiming at the break on g5 created earlier. It is also important to note that the center is firmly controlled. Since Black has no central break available, a flank attack is fully justified. At this point, one wonders what Ulf Andersson was thinking after White's last two moves. Play continued with rook d8, and, since the g4 square was twice defended, the g-pawn advance was not yet possible. Therefore, the knight headed to e4. Black's queen then went to f7, and, no longer defending g4, the advance finally became feasible. Black replied with g6. White placed a rook on g3, and after bishop g7, brought the other rook to g1, completing development. Earlier, we noted that this attacking scheme, literally pioneered by Fischer, proved highly influential and was later adopted by many players. I could show numerous examples of the very same plan with Black. However, let me highlight an emblematic example with White. a game where Magnus Carlsen employs the same plan to defeat Abdusattorov. We can see that Carlsen has all his pieces placed exactly where Fischer had his, and he, too, went on to win in fine style. Returning to the game, Black moved the knight to b6, while White's knight jumped to c5, simultaneously hitting b7 and the bishop on e6. To defend, the bishop dropped back to c8. To keep the kingside initiative rolling, Fischer maneuvered his knight to h4. This is a key attacking idea, one Black should have prevented by tucking the king to h8, as we will soon see. Instead, they chose to retreat the knight to d7, aiming to chase away White's knight entrenched on c5. Fischer, however, had no interest in trading pieces, since that would ease Black's defensive task, so he moved the knight back to e4. There was still time to play king h8, but Black did not address White's attacking ideas, and instead put the knight on f8. After this, White's original idea behind this move is realized as the knight jumps to f5. The idea of sacrificing on f5 to blast open the g-file and keep the attack rolling is well known from the Ruy Lopez. For example, here is a position where the same idea was executed. We can dive deeper into this theme in a future video. For the moment, if the knight were taken, g takes f5 would dangerously open the g-file, and with the bishop pinned, White would have numerous latent tactical threats. In fact, the engine already indicates a huge advantage for White. This is precisely why Black should have prevented all of this earlier by tucking the king into the corner. Therefore, rolling back one move, Black wisely declined to capture and instead developed the bishop to e6. This move targets the b3 pawn, but White easily defends by returning the knight to c5. In doing so, the pawn is protected, and the knight once again hits both the bishop and the b7 pawn. From here, under mounting pressure, Anderson begins to unravel and withdraws his knight to e7, determined to drive away the troublesome knight on f5. Fischer replies by capturing the bishop on g7. After the recapture, Black's principal kingside defender is gone, and the dark square diagonal will be weakened once the strong g5 thrust arrives. Remember our earlier note about f6. Fischer is now exploiting that decision at world champion level. Play continued with knight f5, hitting the rook. White simply moves the rook to f3. With b7 undefended, Black pushes b6 to chase the knight, but Fischer inserts the intermediate move, g takes f6. If queen takes f6, then the knight drops back to e4 with tempo against the queen, after which there is no satisfactory way to hold e5. White would be winning on the spot. For this reason, rolling back one move, Black declined to capture on f6 and instead tucked the king to h8. White then captured the bishop and the rook recaptured. White haven't just won a pawn, that isn't the point. They've secured the bishop pair against the two knights. If the position were completely closed, this might not matter as much, but with the bishops poised to attack, it becomes a decisive advantage. All that remains is to open lines so that Black's position collapses. Hence, Fischer strikes in the center with d4. At first glance, this looks odd. After the pawn exchange, the bishop cannot recapture because that square is guarded by the knight. But the true idea behind d4 is not to recapture. It's to open the diagonal so the bishop can land on c4, pinning the rook to the queen. Black counters with d3. White could play queen d2, win the exchange on e6, and then take the d3 pawn. But for the moment, White is in no hurry and simply captures the pawn. The threats remain unstoppable. In any case, the bishop will reach c4 with decisive effect. If at any moment the queen moves away from f7, the f-pawn will advance with check, which would be disastrous for the Black king. Seeking to forestall the attack, the Swedish player sacrifices the exchange, eliminating the strong bishop. The queen recaptures, and the other rook comes to d6, attacking it. The queen simply steps to c4, offering a queen trade, which is declined with knight e6. White places the bishop on e5, attacking the rook and forcing it back to d8. To break down Black's kingside defenses, Fischer pushes h4. Black replies with knight d6, hitting the queen, which goes to g4. The knight retreats to f8, and the powerful kingside break continues with h5. If the pawn is captured, now or later, the entry along the g-file will be completely decisive against the Black king. Therefore, the pawn cannot be taken, and the other knight also retreats to e8. At this moment, something curious arises. If you were playing white here, what would you play? Pause the video, think for a moment, and make a quick decision. The engine shows a large advantage for white and several winning lines. But it also highlights e4 as the most precise move, exactly what Fischer plays here. The Swedish player is, in effect, facing a machine. The game continued with rook d2, after which white played rook h3. Now capturing on g6 is threatened, and recapturing would be impossible because of the pin along the h-file, so the king steps to g8. Even so, the pawn is taken, the knight recaptures, and the attack rolls on with f4. The threat is f5, winning a piece, so the black king, quite desperate, runs to f8. White's queen goes to g5, the knight drops back to d6 and is immediately removed. Here, Ulf Andersson stops the clock and resigns. For example, if the bishop were recaptured with the rook, f5 would follow. After the knight moves, say to e5, queen g7 check would be completely decisive. A commanding Fischer performance. See you in the next video.